what this country should be about. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that after I finish speaking that Senator Blumenthal be allowed to speak.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This Saturday we're going to mark the one-year anniversary of the shooting in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, in which 20 little 6- and 7-year-old boys and girls lost their lives, as well as 6 adults worked in that school who were charged with protecting them. And Senator Blumenthal and I have come down to the floor today to offer some thoughts as we reflect on 365 days past since the most horrific mass shooting that most of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. And I think back a lot on that day, being in the Sandy Hook firehouse as the parents realized that their sons and daughters weren't coming back from that school. And one of the things that I remember, Mr. President, about that day is getting an awful lot of phone calls from my colleagues from all around the country, senators and congressmen who represented places like Columbine and Aurora and Virginia Tech and Tucson. And they all called because they had been through this before, and they wanted just to offer their condolences and a little bit of advice on how a community can try to get through these just awful, tragic, shattering incidents. And I sort of thought that day how awful it was that there were that many colleagues, that many representatives from across the country who could call and give me advice. What a tragedy it is that we are amassing this bank of expertise across the nation on how to respond to mass shootings. And it speaks to how far and wide the carnage and the devastation is from these mass shootings that are occurring now, it seems, almost on a weekly or monthly basis somewhere around the country. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. You know, in 1949, a guy by the name of Howard Unruh went through the streets of his town of East Camden, New Jersey, firing shots indiscriminately such that he killed 13 people. It was the nation's first mass shooting. Now, we have unfortunately had a lot of mass shootings since that first one in 1949. But here's what's stunning. Of all of the mass shootings that have taken place since 1949, half of them took place from 1949 to 2007, and the other half have taken place in the last 6 years. Something has gone wrong. Something has changed. The problem is it's not this place. We're approaching the one-year mark of the school shooting in Sandy Hook, and it will be a week of mourning. But here in the United States Senate, it should also be a week of embarrassment. It should be a week of shame. That after 1 year passing since 20 little boys and girls were gunned down in a 5-minute hail of furious bullets, that the United States Senate and the House of Representatives has done nothing to try to prevent these kind of mass atrocities in the future. So, Mr. President, I want to come down here today not just to challenge this place to act, but just to tell you a little bit about what I've learned in the last year. I've learned a lot, but I just want to distill it down to 2 pretty simple things that I've learned. I didn't work on the issue of gun violence when I was a member of the House of Representatives, in part because my corner of Connecticut didn't have tremendously high levels of gun deaths. Now it is central to my mission as a United States Senator. And what I've learned over the last year is that despite all the rhetoric that we hear from the gun lobby, when you change gun laws to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and to take dangerous military-style weapons and ammunition off of the streets, guess what happens? Communities become safer. And the data tells us this. Since 1998, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System has blocked more than 2 million gun sales from prohibited purchasers. That's up to 2 million criminals, people with criminal histories that should not have bought a gun, that were prohibited from buying a gun. The background check system works, but for the fact that only about 60% of gun purchases actually go through the system, because more and more guns are being bought in online sales, more and more guns are being bought online, more and more guns are being bought at gun shows. We know that background checks work because we've stopped 2 million people who would be prohibited from owning guns because they have a history of domestic abuse or serious felonies or mental illness. 2 million times we've stopped those people from getting guns. Second, we can compare what happens in states with near universal background check systems versus states that have looser laws. I'll give you one statistic for instance. In states that require a background check for every handgun sale, there is a 38% reduction in the number of women who are shot to death by intimate partners. Deaths from domestic violence are almost 40% less in states that have near universal background checks. The same data exists for assault weapons as well. In 1994, we passed the assault weapons ban. And over the next 9 years, crimes committed with assault weapons declined by 2/3. Now, there are legitimate arguments that there are other factors that contributed to that decline, but certainly a portion of that decline is connected to the restriction on assault weapons. 37% of police departments reported a noticeable increase in criminals' use of assault weapons since the 1994 federal ban expired. And, Mr. President, when it comes to these high-capacity magazine clips, we don't need the data that's out there, because common sense just tells us that if somebody decides to do mass damage with a high-powered weapon, they're going to do less damage if they only have 10 bullets in a clip rather than 30. Adam Lanza in Sandy Hook Elementary School got off 154 bullets, killed 20 children and 6 adults in less than 5 minutes. In Tucson, a 70-year-old retired Army colonel and a 61-year-old woman were able to subdue the shooter when he went to change cartridges. In Aurora, the rampage essentially stopped when James Holmes went to switch cartridges. When you have to reload multiple times, there are multiple opportunities for these mass shootings to stop. Now, we should do things to make sure that the shootings never begin in the first place, but the carnage is much worse when these madmen are walking into shopping plazas, movie theaters, and schools with 30-round clips and 100-round drums. But here's the second thing I've learned, Mr. President. I've learned this as well over the last year. I've learned about the amazing ability of good to triumph over evil, even when this place doesn't act to change the laws. I've learned that despite the evil of those 5 minutes in Sandy Hook, the community of Newtown has amazingly found a way over and over and over again to bring so much beauty and goodness to essentially cover up and drown out that horror. I've seen these kids' memories become the inspiration for literally thousands of acts of generosity and kindness. Daniel Barden was just a genetically compassionate little kid. He was that kid that always sat with the kid in school who didn't have anybody sitting next to them on the bus or in the classroom. When his parents would take him to the supermarket, they'd be all the way to their car with their groceries. They'd look back, and Daniel was still at the door holding open the grocery store door for people that were leaving. His parents started up a Facebook page that just challenged people to engage in little small acts of kindness in Daniel's memory. It had about 40,000 likes at the last time that I had checked, and the stories are endless on there. a woman who bought coffee and donuts for a firehouse in New York State, a Missouri woman who helped restock a food pantry in Daniel's honor, a woman in Illinois who paid for a stranger's meal and just wrote "Love from Daniel Barden" on the bill. Jack Pinto was a really active 6-year-old boy. He enjoyed playing sports of all kinds. He was buried in his New York Giants jersey. His parents, Dean and Tricia Pinto, have raised money and put some of their own money in to pay for hundreds of children all around the country to have access to the same kind of opportunity to play sports that Jack did, despite the fact that their families might not have the resources that the Pintos do. Jessica Ricos loved animals. She loved whales and horses most. And so her parents started up a foundation, the Jessica Ricos Foundation, and they've provided year-long scholarships for horseback riding lessons for students who wouldn't otherwise have the resources to be able to have the opportunity to enjoy horses in the same way that Jessica did. And this week, an effort is underway in Newtown and across the nation to inspire people to every day do a different act of kindness as a way to pay tribute to the one-year anniversary. These charities that have sprung up in the wake of Newtown, they're doing amazing work to change people's lives, just the small acts of kindness that maybe we all do in trying to pay tribute to the memory of those kids and those adults. That makes a difference. But, Mr. President, charitable acts and changes in behavior, they are just necessary, though insufficient, responses to the scourge of gun violence that plagues our nation. This place has to change the laws. Do something. Because you don't want to be next. You don't want to be sitting on a train station platform, as I was on December 14th, when you get a call that 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 kids or adults have been gunned down in your state. And you certainly don't want to get that call when you had a chance that you didn't take to do something to prevent it. I got calls that day from my colleagues all across the country because there aren't many corners of the nation that haven't been touched by gun violence. 11,000 people have been killed by guns just since December 14th of last year. And when one person is killed, psychologists tell us that there are at least 10 other people who sustain life-altering trauma as a result of that shooting. So just imagine when 26 kids and adults die in a small community. So I want to leave you not with my words, but with the words of a mother from Sandy Hook who represents the scope of the trauma that has been the reality for Sandy Hook for the last 365 days. Sandy Hook is recovering, but very slowly. The charities and the acts of kindness, they make a difference, but there is a lot of head shaking in that community as to why this place hasn't risen to the occasion, shown the same type of courage that those families have, and done something to change the reality of everyday and exceptional mass violence across this country. Here's what this mother writes. These are her words in an open letter. In addition to the tragic loss of her playmates, friends and teachers, my first grader suffers from PTSD. She was in the first room by the entrance to the school. Her teacher was able to gather the children into the tiny bathroom inside the classroom. There she stood with 14 of her classmates and her teacher, all of them crying. You see, she heard what was happening on the other side of the wall. She heard everything. She was sure that she was going to die that day, and she didn't want to die for Christmas. Imagine what that must have been like. She struggles nightly with nightmares, difficulty falling asleep, being afraid to go anywhere on her own. At school, she becomes withdrawn. She cries daily. She covers her ears when it gets too loud, waits for it to happen again. She is 6. And we are furious. We're furious that 26 families must suffer with grief so deep and so wide that it's unimaginable. We're furious that the innocence and safety of my children's lives has been taken. Furious that someone had access to the type of weapon used in this massacre. Furious that gun makers make ammunition with such high rounds and our government does nothing to stop them. Furious that the ban on assault weapons was carelessly left to expire. Furious that lawmakers let the gun lobbyists have so much control. furious that somehow someone's right to own a gun is more important than my children's rights to life, furious that lawmakers are too scared to take a stand. She finishes by writing this: I ask you to think about your choices. Look at the pictures of the 26 innocent lives taken so needlessly and wastefully, using a weapon that never should have been in the hands of civilians. Really think. Changing the laws may inconvenience some gun owners, but it may also save a life, perhaps a life that is dear to me or you. Are you really willing to risk it? There must not be another Sandy Hook. You have a responsibility and an obligation to act now and to change the laws. I hope and pray that you do not fail. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many words have been spoken since Newtown, including the very powerful words of my colleague just now. But the plain, simple fact is, no words can capture what I feel about that day. No words ever will capture that day or the days and weeks and months afterward, when we have grieved and healed and resolved that we will do everything within our power to make sure that that kind of massacre never happens again. But equally important, that the deaths by gunfire are reduced or prevented. Those 26 senseless, unspeakable deaths of 20 beautiful children and 6 great educators, but also the 194 children who have been killed by gunfire since Newtown, among the 10,000 or more deaths caused by gunfire, person by person. A tragic river of senseless deaths that we have the power to prevent, the power in this body and the power in this nation. As much as we should be shamed and embarrassed by the failure to act, we also must have hope and resolve that we will act. History is on our side. And the example of courage and strength provided by those families ought to give us the resolve and the determination to act. And likewise, the examples of courage and resolve by Father Bob Weiss, who had a service in St. Rose of Lima on the evening of December 14, one of the most moving public experiences I will ever have. And as I said then, the world is watching Newtown. The world has watched Newtown. It has watched First Selectman Pat Lodra, who has led Newtown with her own courage and strength and determination, including coming here as my guest on the night of the State of the Union to be an example for all of us about what a public official can do by her own example, leading by her own example. We will mark this Saturday morning at St. Rose of Lima the one-year anniversary at a service that Senator Murphy and I will attend. I have worn, since virtually that day, a bracelet, and I wear it now. It says, "We are Newtown, we choose love." If there is a message for all of us in this chamber, it is that we continue to choose love. And we are all Newtown. Our town is Newtown. All of our towns are Newtown. And I see this bracelet literally from the time I wake in the morning to when I go to bed. And it will always be an inspiration for me. Inescapably, our hearts and minds go back to that moment when we first learned about this horrific, unspeakable tragedy. Of course, I went to the Newtown firehouse that day, and the sights and sounds of grief and pain are seared in my memory, and they will be with me forever. So will be the stories of the children whom we lost. Allison McDonnell and Grace Wyatt, who loved to draw pictures for their families and planned to be art artists. Chase Kowalski, a Cub Scout who loved playing baseball with his father. Jessica Ricos, who wanted to research orca whales and become a cowgirl. And we will never forget the heroism and the bravery of the educators like Vicki Soto and Anne Marie Murphy. Vicki Soto is in this picture, and her brother Carlos came to a service today here in Washington. He has continued, and so have his sisters, to come to events that provide impetus and movement and momentum to the effort to stop gun violence. Vicki Soto and Anne Marie Murphy literally shielded their students, sought to save them with their own bodies. Dawn Hotspring and Mary Sherlock ran unhesitatingly toward the danger entering their school and perished doing so. There are heroes in this story. It is not only about bad people who use guns improperly and illegally. It is not only about evil, it is also about good, and the good includes the first responders and police who stopped the shooting when they came to the school and ran toward danger and toward the gunfire and thereby ended it when the shooter took his own life. It is also about Anna Marquez Green, a beautiful girl who loved music and flowers, loved to wear flower in her hair. And she was described by Bishop Leroy Bailey as a beautiful, adoring child. That picture evokes the stories of all those children, beautiful, adoring, a future and a life ahead of them. And for all those stories, and the tears, and the teddy bears and tributes that were outside the firehouse, Newtown has refused to be defined simply by tragedy, refused to be locked in its past. It has moved forward because Newtown is not just a moment, it is a movement. It is not just a moment in history defined by tragedy, it is a movement to make the world better. It is a movement to make America safer. And that is the movement that we have articulated and sought to advance. Those families, including Neil Heslin, who has come here numerous times for his son, Jesse, have been an example of courage. Indeed, they have been profiles in courage. When Neil Heslin dropped Jesse off at school on the morning of December 14th, Jesse gave him a hug. And he said, quote, "It's going to be all right. Everything's going to be okay, Dad." Because Jesse was that kind of kid, Neil told the United States Senate Judiciary Committee in his testimony. And his pride in Jesse, as well as his grief, brought tears to all of our eyes. Jesse was just that kind of kid. He never wanted to leave a baby crying. He never wanted to leave anybody feeling hurt. And Jesse and Neil used to talk about coming to Washington, about meeting with the president. Neil met with the president, but Jesse was not there. At least physically, he was not there. He was with all of us. as we worked with Neil to make America safer and make sure that Newtown is not a moment, but a movement toward a better, safer America. And I want to thank my colleagues for the outpouring of feeling and support on the eve of that tragedy. It was a rare moment of bipartisan unison in feeling as well as words. And for meeting with many of those families, I want to thank them as well, because they demonstrated a graciousness and generosity, regardless of their views on any of the issues relating to gun violence and any of the bills on the floor. That graciousness and generosity, I hope, will prevail on this issue and, again, move us forward. And the acts of kindness and generosity that followed have been inspiring as well. The college students and firefighters who've come together to build playgrounds in honor of the Sandy Hook victims. Bill Lavin of New Jersey, on behalf of the firefighters, has done yeoman work. And there are now new playgrounds in their memory in Norwalk, London, Fairfield, Ansonia, Westport, and Stratford. I've visited many of them. They are distinct, reflecting the character of those children like Anna Marquez Green. The Newtown High School football team took time away from celebrating a perfect winning season to devote their efforts to the children and educators that we've lost. And the Sandy Hook Run for Families not only raised more than $450,000 for the Sandy Hook Support Fund, but it also broke the world record for attendance. In millions of actions, large or small, in Connecticut, all around the country, the people of Newtown and Connecticut and the country showed what compassion and giving and kindness really mean in action. They chose to honor them by action. And often the compassion and kindness unleashed by the Newtown tragedy took many other forms that were unheralded and unreported and unspoken. Acts of kindness that were not in the newspapers or in the public view, but simply acts that meant something to the recipient and to the giver. These fundraisers and vigils, emails and postcards, small and large signs of recognition and love from our colleagues, from people across the country, are a form of giving back. And they give me hope that eventually we will prevail in this effort to make a difference. Scarlett Lewis, Jesse's mom, is also a hero. She heard about the Cruz family, who had lost 2 of their children to a drunk driver. Scarlett responded with that same resilience and strength by offering to give a fundraiser for the Cruz family. And when she was asked about her family and about what she had done, she explained, quote, "What brings meaning to the suffering is doing something for someone else. In doing something for them, I'm also helping my own healing," end of quote. Nearly 90% of Americans support common sense measures like background checks, a number that is virtually unchanged since the issue soared to the forefront of our political discourse in the wake of Sandy Hook. Even in gun-owning households, the support is virtually identical, 88%. That figure hasn't changed. And a mountain of public support has failed to produce measures, but our resolve is unchanged, because those memories of Sandy Hook, those examples of kindness and compassion will drive us forward, and so will the more than 10,000 other victims, including at least 194 children under the age of 12 in 43 different states. Congress has shamefully and disgracefully failed to act. But that is not the end of the story. There has been one vote, and we've lost. But that vote is not the end of this movement, because Newtown is not a moment. It is a movement. And surrender is unacceptable. The status quo is inexcusable. The families and Newtown community have refused to surrender to personal despair, and we cannot surrender to political dismay or difficulty. I was moved the other day when I saw a clip of Ronald Reagan endorsing the Brady Bill. Ronald Reagan, as president, was a victim of gun violence, and so was James Brady, who was paralyzed by the same hail of bullets that struck the President of the United States when they were fired by a deranged person, John Hinckley. 12 years passed before the Brady Bill was passed. 12 years of struggle and work, resolve and courage by Sarah and Jim Brady, and eventually an endorsement by Ronald Reagan. So the sadness and anger that I feel today, prompted by the memory of that tragedy and this body's failure to respond, is mitigated by the knowledge that history is on our side, that America is better than that vote that we took in April. The people of Newtown have not failed. The people of America have not failed. And this body has not yet failed. We can and we will do better, because Newtown and that vote will be with us. Newtown is more than a moment. It's a movement that eventually will prevail. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Unlucky devil. Mr. President.
A senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I rise to address the nomination of Cornelia Pillard for the District Court, D.C. District Court. This nomination is a good example of government overreach that's led to things like the Obamacare debacle. And let me say to my colleagues who have been on the floor talking about Newtown, I had the opportunity to spend an hour with parents of Newtown children. What a compelling personal story that they shared. And no parent should have to watch a child die. No parent should have to live and a child die. And my heart still goes out to those that lost children at Newtown. Mr. President, today, with the Affordable Care Act fresh on my mind, I ventured back to think about what I came on the floor in 2009 and said in front of my colleagues in the United States Senate and to the American people. And I'd like to spend the balance of this second half of hour sort of rehashing some of the things that I came to the floor and talked about. There were numerous opportunities before that legislation was passed. If I remember, very close to Christmas in December of 2009. I said this: premiums will increase for younger and healthier individuals because the new federally mandated rating rules. Over 40% of the uninsured are ages 18 to 34, the same group that will be hit with the highest price increases if this bill passes. What do we hear Americans focused on today? Young people, are they going to join? Today, their insurance is 3 times lower than what it's going to be in January of 2014. Why? Because of the Affordable Care Act. 2, premiums will increase because of new federally mandated insurance standards. Experts estimate many of the health plans purchased today by individuals and small businesses will not meet the minimum requirements mandated by this bill, which means that all Americans will be forced to buy richer plans. Let me remind those that are listening. This was in 2009 on the Senate floor. Listen to the comments of those today that say, well, we never anticipated some of these things would happen. If they didn't anticipate, it's not because people weren't on the Senate floor, and it wasn't because we made this up. It's because people who were experts, CMS actuaries, CBO administrators, were sharing with us what would happen if this legislation became law. Premiums will increase because new federally mandated benefit packages. The bill empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to decide which benefits are covered and which benefits are not. What are Americans learning every single day now that they can get on the exchange? They're finding that they're 60, 65 years old and they've got to have maternity coverage. Well, Mr. President, let me say, I just turned 58. My wife has pretty much informed me we're not going to have any more children. But I can't buy health care without maternity coverage. Why? Because they want to charge me more to shift that cost. We didn't have health reform. We just changed where we're shifting the cost from. Now we're embedding the cost in the premium versus charging more at the delivery point of health care and shifting it within the delivery system. Now we're shifting it within the population by charging those of us that are a little bit older more because we mandate that we've got to have services we're never going to use, and younger people who are healthy that probably are never going to need to go to the doctor. I hope they do, because prevention is actually one of the most beneficial things that we can promote. But now we're going to charge them 3 times what they were paying, and we believe that they'll take it? Premiums will increase because the new excise tax on medical devices. Innovation is what saves health care dollars. Yet in the Affordable Care Act, or some call the Obamacare, we actually put new taxes on medical devices. So every time you've got a stent that's inserted, every time there's a medical device that's used on you, your health care bill goes up because we've now taxed the device that they're using. Well, if the device goes up, if the price goes up, if the reimbursement goes up, the premium goes up. Starting to make some sense. This again is in 2009 before we passed the bill. Premiums will increase because of a new excise tax on health plans. We actually taxed the same health plans that are in the exchange that we told everybody would save them money. Premiums will increase because the new excise tax on prescription drugs. Now, wait a minute. I thought we were bringing down the cost of health care. In 2009, again, new taxes on devices, new taxes on health plans, new taxes on prescription drugs. These were all things that we all knew. The President knew it. My colleagues that voted for the plan knew it. But everybody seems to have amnesia today. Oh, my gosh, how could the cost go up? I never knew that this was going to require people to buy a health insurance policy that had benefits that they would never use. Premiums will increase because a new fee to sell plans in the mandated exchanges. This phenomenal exchange market that we created competition, we now created a new fee to enter into it on the part of insurers. Premiums will increase because of new tax for comparative effectiveness. Comparative effectiveness means that we're trying to bring new generics, whether they're in pharmaceuticals or biologics, to the marketplace, and we've decided to tax that process. Premiums will increase because the bill forces 15 million more Americans to enroll in Medicaid. Why does that happen? It happens because doctors are paid so little on Medicaid that they have to charge more for everybody else. So we're cost shifting when we purchase the premium, and now all of a sudden we're learning we're cost shifting even when the service is delivered. Reform? No. 2009, again, I came to the floor and I talked about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. 0 times did it mention provisions prohibiting the rationing of health care. 0. 9 times it mentioned new taxes created in the bill. 13 pages in the table of contents. The bill weighed 20.8 pounds. 36 pages it took for the CBO to estimate the price tag of Obamacare. 70 government programs authorized by the bill. 1,697 times in the Affordable Care Act, the Secretary of Health and Human Services was given the authority to create, determine, and define things in the bill. A bureaucrat that we allowed 1,697 times to determine what Congress' intent was in the legislation. Almost 3,000 pages. 3,607 times the word shall. Not may, shall were in the bill. $6.8 million cost to taxpayers per word. I remind you, this is what I came to the floor and talked about in 2009 before the United States Senate passed this legislation in the dark of night. 24 million people left without health care. This is the bill that was supposed to insure everybody. 24 million people without health insurance. $1.2 billion cost to the taxpayer per page. $5 to $10 billion of additional funding needed for IRS implementation of the bill. In other words, we're going to fund $5 to $10 billion for the IRS to chase down people that owe a penalty because they made a determination, I can't afford or I don't need health care insurance. $8 billion in taxes levied on uninsured individuals. Now, there's a way to make health care affordable. Tax people that don't have it. $25 billion of additional Medicaid mandates placed on states. $28 billion in new taxes on employers not providing the government-approved plans. $100 billion estimated annually of fraud in Medicare and Medicaid. $118 billion in cuts in Medicare Advantage to seniors all across this country that found this product to be the one that provided the most security and benefits for them. $465 billion in cuts to Medicare. Cuts to Medicare. A health care system that was at that time projected to be insolvent in 2017. $494 billion in revenue from new taxes, fees levied on American families and businesses. $2.5 trillion cost for full implementation of the legislation. At that time, Mr. President, we had a $12 trillion debt. Today, $17 trillion debt. Health care was supposed to be more affordable because we reformed it. We didn't reform it. We took it over. The federal government took it over. Let me go to another process that I talked about in 2009. It's all marked up. It's been in my desk drawer since then. It's a word search of the bill. 4,677 times that legislation said shall, must, or require. 899 times it said tax, fee, or revenue. 470 times it said agency, department, commission, panel, or bureau. 196 times it said regulate or regulation. 134 times it mentioned treatment. 180 times it mentioned prevention. 40 times it mentioned choice. 25 times it mentioned innovation. 13 times it mentioned competition. You know, if you listen to those that are out selling this awful plan today, what are the three words you hear? Choice, innovation, competition. Those things mentioned least in almost 3,000 pages of health care legislation in 2009. This bill wasn't reform. This bill spent trillions of dollars at a time of record deficits and debt. When fully implemented, I said then, this bill is projected to cost $2.5 trillion over 10 years. CBO said at the time, this bill will increase federal health costs, not lower it. What have we heard the president? It's going to lower health costs. It's going to bring it down. It's going to be more affordable. Middle class, this is the greatest deal for you. The bill raised taxes by more than $500 billion at a time of record unemployment. The bill violated the president's own pledge to protect the middle class. Who gets taxed in this bill? Again, this is in 2009 on the Senate floor right here before the vote. Uninsured Americans, insured Americans, families with high-value insurance plans, high health costs, small business, individuals who need medicines or medical devices, and employers that provide retiree drug coverage. Employers that provide retiree drug coverage, we taxed them. The bill cut $466 billion in Medicare to fund new government programs. Medicare faced at that time a $38 trillion underfunded liability and insolvency that was projected to be 2017. Instead of fixing those problems, this bill raided Medicare to start a new government entitlement. The bill cut Medicare Advantage, it cut hospitals, it cut nursing homes, it cut home health, it cut hospice. Nobody in the administration can go out today and say, oh my gosh, we didn't know this was going to happen. We talked about it right here, day after day after day. These are not things that we made up. If we did, we would be prophets, because they're all coming true. Everything is aligning with what we said. The bill would increase premiums, making care more expensive, not less. I mean, let's get past what was the easy part, and that was setting up the exchange, setting up the website, or at least it should have been. New taxes in this bill will get passed on to consumers, increasing yearly premiums. This is what I said then. Listen to this. By $488 a year, according to some estimates, the average premiums would increase by $2,100 for a family policy in the individual market. There are individuals that are seeing $488 a month in increase. And in addition to that, a deductible that they've never had applied to them before. This bill imposed costly new burdens on struggling states. The bill threatens health care choices millions now enjoy with a tangled web of new rules, regulations, and government-run plan. The government will require you to purchase insurance or face a fine. And will tell you what kind of insurance you have to have, even if you like what you currently have. Mr. President, I'm not a prophet. I was going by what the experts said reading the bill. So for everybody that went out and said, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. If you like your hospital, you can keep it. We were on the Senate floor saying, it's not what the bill says. It's not going to happen. This bill cut $135 billion from hospitals, $120 billion from 11 million seniors on Medicare Advantage, nearly $15 billion from nursing homes, nearly $40 billion from home health agencies, nearly $7 billion from hospice. Cutting Medicare to fund a new government program, in my book, is not reform. It's ignorance. The CMS Office of the Actuary. Now, let me tell you, the actuary is like the gold standard. The CMS actuary is like the guy who puts that stamp of approval on and that there's nobody that's higher from a standpoint of what the actuary said. He said the bill increases national health expenditures. National health expenditures under this bill would increase by an estimate of a total of $234 billion, 0.7% during 2010 and 2019. It's exactly opposite of what everybody's out saying today. Despite promises that reform would reduce health care spending growth, the bill actually bends the health care curve upward. According to the analysts, the analysis, the national health expenditure as a share of GDP is projected to be 20.9 in 2010 compared to 20.8% under current law. How could you go out and make a claim that this was bending the cost curve down? How could you promise the American people that it was going to be cheaper? The total number of persons with employer coverage in 2019 by the CMS actuary pre-2009 when the bill was passed to be 5 million lower under the reform package than under current law. Let me say that again. CMS actuary told us in 2009, before we passed this bill, that employer-based coverage would drop 5 million additional covered lives. And I might say, Mr. President, some estimates are coming in at 100 million employees losing their health care under employer plans right now. The new fees for drugs, devices, and insurance plans in the bill will increase prices, health insurance premiums, costs for insurers, for consumers. This will increase the national health expenditure by approximately $11 billion per year. The bill funds $930 billion in new federal spending by relying on Medicare payment cuts, which are unlikely to be sustainable or permanent. As a result, providers could find it difficult to remain profitable, and absent legislative intervention might end their participation in the Medicare program, possibly jeopardizing the care to beneficiaries. See, it wasn't Republicans that talked about rationing. It was the actuary at CMS. In his analysis of the Affordable Care Act, he said, here's what's going to happen. And it's seniors that are going to get hosed on it because they're not going to have access to the doctors anymore. The bill is especially likely to result in providers being unwilling to treat Medicare and Medicaid patients, meaning that a significant portion of the increased demand for Medicaid services would be difficult to meet. How could anybody listen or read what the CMS actuary said and remotely go out and tell the American people, geez, this is going to increase coverage for everybody? CMS actuary noted that the Medicare cuts in the bill could jeopardize Medicare beneficiaries' access to care. He also found that roughly 20% of all Part A providers, hospitals, nursing homes, etc., would become unprofitable within the next 10 years as a result of these cuts, meaning they're going to go out of business. You know, pretty soon it's not going to be the network that the insurance provider put together. It's going to be the fact that the hospital went out of business because they couldn't withstand what this bill has done to them. CMS actuary found that further reductions in Medicare growth rates through the actions of the Independent Medicare Advisory Board. Now, that's going to sound a little odd to some because prior to the bill passing, it was called the Independent Medicare Advisory Board. It's now called the Independent Payment Advisory Board, IPAB, an entity that was set up that when it's kicked in, 16 members picked by the President, they will determine reimbursement, scope of coverage. It's not the Congress of the United States. If we don't legislatively do something with their recommendation, it becomes law. It goes into effect. The bill would cut payments to Medicare Advantage plans by approximately $110 billion over 10 years, resulting in less generous benefit packages and decreasing enrollment in Medicare Advantage plans by about 33%. 33% of seniors would lose their Advantage plan. And again, Mr. President, this is 2009. This is not today. Higher cost, President in 3,000 pages said it would reduce cost. Chief Actuary says that's not the case. Mr. President, let me read a letter. A letter I got in the last couple of weeks from Lori Perez, Willow Springs, North Carolina. I'm a divorced mom of 3. I received insurance through my employer. My rate has increased $100 a month. This is a huge difference that will have to be budgeted by reducing groceries and foregoing my son's braces that I had planned for 2014. I looked into dropping my company-provided insurance, joining an exchange, but I don't qualify to receive a subsidy because my insurance rate's less than 9.5% of my income. It's 9%. My yearly income qualifies. Apparently, Obama thinks I can afford an additional $1,200 a year. I'm considering dropping my insurance, paying out of pocket as needed for health care and paying the fine at the end of the year. It'd be less expensive. This is ridiculous. What can I do? What do you say to Lori? Oops. That's the law? Here's somebody who was 100% satisfied, an employer doing the right thing. And the federal government has now put her in a situation that she's considering just giving up her health care, doing away with it. Why? Because she can't afford it. This is a woman with a job. She's thinking about giving up her groceries, delaying her son's braces. Why? Because of Obamacare. Where are we today? Let me speed forward. Well, I said that we've got the healthcare exchange, the healthcare.gov, the website. Now, there are companies every day that get websites set up. This one is complicated. 3 years to do it. It's still not right today. But I'm convinced they'll get it right. But for the first time, the American people are getting ready to, they're getting on the website and they're able to look at these health care options that they've got. And what are they finding? They're finding the premium cost for something that equals what they had 2 times, 3 times more expensive per month. They're finding this new thing that they've never had before. It's called deductibles. And I'm not talking about a $100 deductible that you have to pay before you get some participation in a doctor's visit or an emergency room visit. I'm talking about $1,000, $3,000, $5,000. I've heard from friends that they've now signed up for plans that have a $15,000 deductible. Geez, I say to my colleagues, especially my colleague from Florida, sounds like a health savings account, doesn't it? You got insurance, but you're responsible for the first $15,000 of it. Well, the guy that shared that with me, his premium is $1,444 a month with a $15,000 deductible. I don't think he's going to drop it, but sticker shock is rampant. Benefit package. How many people have come up to me and said, I'm not going to have any more children, but I got to have maternity coverage. Something's wrong. They're right. Something is wrong. How many kids would like to have a scaled-down thing that allowed them to have this set of benefits, and they're willing to roll the dice on if something bad happens, they'll pay out of pocket? No, they don't get that option. Choice does not exist unless it's the choice of the things that were created in the Affordable Care Act. Networks. This is one American people haven't gotten to yet, and I can't wait till it happens. I've gone through getting on the D.C. exchange, going through the process of trying to figure out, is my doctor in North Carolina available under this plan or that plan? Wait until the American people get into healthcare.gov and they start picking a plan and they look to see, is my primary care doc on there? Is my hospital on there? Is the specialist I see on there? Are the drugs that I take on this plan? I mean, this is incredibly complicated. And the American people were used to calling their insurance broker and saying, hey, here's how much coverage I want, and here's how much I've got to spend, and here's my health condition. And they sort of designed a program to meet their health condition, their income, and their age. Now, we penalize you for your age if you're old or young, and we force everybody to take the same benefit package regardless of whether you can afford it or not. And we say if you don't get it, we're going to charge you this year a 1% penalty on your income. That goes up to about 2.5% at the end of the transition period. Well, we're going to get past this period, which I call the enrollment plan period. And next, we get to the part that the President delayed. You see, we never understood that something that was in statute, the executive branch could just decide, no, it's not going to go into effect. But for large and small employers, they had a one-year delay. And all of a sudden in 2015, their employees are going to be in the same marketplace that we are. What makes that particularly difficult is that we extended the enrollment period for individuals in healthcare.gov until March 31st of 2014. They can still enroll. Well, April 1st of 2014 through April 27th of 2014, insurers have to decide what their premium cost is in 2015. So given that they have no real experience on what the mix of ages and health conditions in their plan are, what are they going to do? They're going to err on the side of higher premiums. That's higher than what we're seeing today in 2014, which a majority of the American people say are higher than they can afford. Imagine what it's going to be like in 2015. And in that group is the 80% of America, not the 5 to 10% that are provided for by employers today. Mr. President, I see my colleague here, and I'm infringing on his hour. But I do want to stress one last thing. I mentioned only once the Independent Payment Advisory Board, IPAB. At the end of the day, mark my word, everything that I commented on, I read from my 2009 notes. Notes that I came to the floor then and said, this bill shouldn't become law, and here's why. I spent 5 minutes talking about today. But I'm going to make this statement, and I'll come back to the floor 2 years from now when IPAB's up and running, and the benefit packages have been cut down and the reimbursements have been cut to doctors and hospitals, and I'll point to the statement that I made here that picking a 16-member advisory panel that has the authority and the power to set the scope of coverage and, more importantly, the reimbursements will have the most devastating effect on health care in this country. It will ration health care because of the doctors that choose not to participate in plans that participate in the exchange. It will force hospitals out of accepting plans that participate in the exchange. And for those of us that are forced by government to be in the exchange and to choose, our choices will be gone. Our costs will go up. Yeah, we'll get care when we're queued in line or at the emergency room or from a doctor we don't know or don't trust or from a hospital we have to drive to see. Not going to be a reassuring thing to that mother who now has maternity coverage and no obstetrician, no local hospital to deliver a child. Because, you see, we didn't reform health care. We didn't do anything to liability. We just changed the pocket we pay out of. We've taxed everybody we could find to pay for it. And still, as I said in 2009, and I believe will be true today, at the end of this process, there'll be 24 million people without health insurance. Why? Because of Obamacare. Because of the choice or the lack of choice that we gave them. I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Florida. Mr. President, I intend to be here for the next little bit under an hour. Look forward to sharing this time here on the floor with you to discuss some of the issues that are before us, particularly